get started with our first session. I'd like to introduce you to the two PEMNA Steering Committee co-chairs, Ms. Alma Kanani of the World Bank and Director General Kyung-Ho Han of the Korea Ministry of Economy and Finance. Ms. Kanani and Director General Han will each deliver their welcome remarks. And Ms. Kanani, over to you.
Ma'am, I think you're muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you.
Good, excellent. Thanks very much. So repeating again, a very warm welcome to everybody in the 2020 PEMNA Plenary Conference on enhancing the effectiveness and sustainability of public finance to COVID-19. As the Secretariat noted, my name is Alma Kanani. I'm from the World Bank, one of the practice managers on governance covering those issues, and one of the two co-chairs of the PEMNA Steering Committee, together here with my colleague, Mr. Han, from the Korean Ministry of Economy and Finance. So the PEMNA plenary meeting traditionally, as you know, brings together members of the Budget CoP and the Treasury CoP to discuss common issues faced in enhancing public financial management systems for stronger economic development, and to break down the silos that often hinder collaboration across the public finance sphere and functions. While we certainly will miss our interactions in person, being there in the same room together, we certainly thought, and the PEMNA leadership as a collective felt that it was important to continue this tradition of the joint annual meetings that we've had in the past. So participating today, we have, hopefully Mongolia has joined by now, but we have about 12 of the 14 PEMNA member countries, as well as, of course, the development partners, ourselves, the World Bank, but I'm hoping that we have already connected online the IMF, the US Treasury Office of the Technical Assistance, and the Treasury of the Russian Federation, who hosted one of the Treasury CoP meetings very successfully last year, or I think earlier this year. So responding to the acute health and economic impacts of the COVID-19 has been a challenge, obviously, for all Treasury and budget offices alike, indeed. If there is any issue that calls for a joined up and coordinated approach around those public finance issues and entities, this certainly has been one of them. So increasing effectiveness and sustainability of our PFM responses has been an urgent topic for our time, and it brings a lot of challenges, both from a policy perspective as well as from an implementation perspective to the PFM systems and processes. And for those of you that were here last May, this is certainly not the first time we're getting together to discuss the impact of COVID and the role of these institutions and policies in addressing COVID-19 responses. We saw in the last BCOP, as the BCOP webinar that we organized in May, that, and also I think a subsequent TCOP webinar a few weeks later from that, we began to hear some of the initial policy and program steps that countries were taking to support the health sector, as well as to address some of the impact of the economic collapse that had impacted most of the countries that we live in and work with. So we also heard that many of the sorry, maybe somebody can mute. Could you please mute? Thank you very much. So we also heard that the early impacts of the pandemic on government revenues and fiscal balances were quite large for most of our countries. We heard also how ministers of finance and yourselves included have really found ways to manage the situation by relaxing fiscal rules or by using other tools, innovative tools, intermediate measures, short-term measures to reallocate budgets, to adjust tax policies, to stimulate demand, to advance payments to suppliers. So a number of measures that were actually quite remarkable to address the situation and the first response. As we enter the final days of the 2020, a year probably that many of us maybe would not want to remember for too long, we want to look back at how countries have adopted their policies and PFM processes during the second half of the 2020 to cope with the prolonged pandemic impacts. But even more importantly, we want to look ahead at the opportunities and prospects for the year ahead, right? While the rate of the new COVID cases has slowed in many parts of East Asia, the economic impacts persist in many other countries, and including in the East Asian countries. Debt levels are at all-time highs for many countries, and a key challenge going forward will certainly be on how to balance the need for targeted stimulus while also coping with the limited fiscal space for new initiatives. In some countries, contingent liabilities and guarantees would add an additional threat to the government balance sheets and the country's credit ratings. On the more positive side, though, we see PFM processes, including budget and treasury systems, challenged to become more agile, to adopt to the new norm. PFM systems need to not only respond quickly and flexibly, but also strive to maintain transparency and accountability, a very important feature actually in the times of COVID and in the effort to build trust in the government and the state. With so much pressure to spend quickly, there's a risk of control systems being compromised unnecessarily. So the World Bank recently issued guidance for countries on maintaining sound fiscal management on the midst of the pandemic and managing the risks of to integrity during the COVID-19 period and also in the post-COVID-19. So as we look ahead for the future distribution of vaccines and end to the pandemic, hopefully in 2021, we are, of course, reminded above all the governments need to retain the trust and support of citizens in order to actually have legitimacy on what they do and in achieving their objectives. So transparency and citizen engagement and accountability systems are really critical foundations to achieving that end. And that certainly is true for most of the work we do on the public finance side. So without further ado, let me stop here. And I really look forward to the presentations today and the active discussion that will follow. And let me pass it over to the Secretariat or Mr. Han, I think coming after me. So welcome to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Alma. Next, Director General Kyung-Ho Han will deliver his remarks.
This is Kyung-Ho Han. I'm very glad to meet you, Ms. Kanani, Mr. Kunta, and Ms. Dui, and all member countries. I would like to express my great appreciation to the Secretariat and the World Bank for organizing the first online plenary conference and all the participants joining today. This year, the plenary conference is focusing on enhancing the effectiveness and sustainability of our fiscal response to COVID-19. It is opportune for us to discuss on where we are and where we should be headed after deploying unprecedented fiscal interventions. The impact of coronavirus on economic activity was greater than expected. So this pandemic placed the Central Budget Authority under this disproportionate burden. We, budget authorities, have prepared supplementary budgets to release stimulus packages, including cash handout. We have also introduced tax measures, soft loans, and sometimes easing of financial regulations. Massive fiscal support saved lives and livelihood. Thanks to your hard work and efforts, Southeast Asian countries have been praised for keeping the number of infections relatively low. According to the IMF Economic Outlook released in October, growth in the advanced economic group is projected at minus 5.8% in 2020, and Latin America and the Caribbean at minus 8.1%, Sub-Saharan African region at minus 3%. Meanwhile, emerging and developing Asia are forecast to record growth at minus 1.7%. This data shows that our members accomplished a relatively fair economic result in the period of COVID-19 crisis. Now, with a vaccination on the horizon, it is time to discuss fiscal sustainability and new fiscal responses in light of the post-COVID-19 era. That is why we convened this conference today. Securing efficiency in fiscal spending became more important than ever. In this context, I supported the overarching theme of this annual PEMNA conference that we have to enhance the effectiveness and the sustainability of fiscal responses to COVID-19. This plenary conference serves as a platform for us to look back on fiscal actions we took and discuss how to sustain these actions coming forward under fiscal constraints. I hope that member countries will overcome COVID-19 successfully as soon as possible so that we can return to normal lives and meet with each other face-to-face in the next PEMNA Plenary Conference. Now I will hand over the mic to Mr. Kunta, who will be moderating following session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you hear me? Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of us. Our honor Ms. Alma Kanani and Mr. Han. So please allow me to extend a very warm welcome to you and appreciate you taking time of your busy schedules to join the first session of this 2020 PEMNA Plenary Conference. So we will start with joint session 1. In this session, we will discuss about fiscal adaptation to COVID-19, looking back and looking ahead. We will share and discuss our experiences with regard to the budget responses to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, as well as new budget priorities for 2021 and beyond post-COVID-19. This topic is very relevant to current condition, like Ms. Kanani and Mr. Han mentioned. Since up until now, most countries are still battling against COVID-19 pandemic. The effectiveness and efficiency of the policies in mitigating the adverse impact of COVID-19 pandemic, while at the same time stimulating economy to recover, should be continuously monitored and evaluated. The result will be used as an input to fine-tuning the fiscal policy responses toward the pandemic in 2021. On the other hand, we should not forget to maintain consistency, improvement, and reform of fiscal policy, including post-COVID-19 pandemic. So, in this joint session, we are delightful to have presentation from Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam. I will introduce this speaker. So from Korea, we have Ms. Sun Yung Kwon. She is a Deputy Director from Fiscal Management and Coordination Division, Ministry of Economy and Finance. And from Thailand, we have Ms. Pongpin Kaisiri, Budget Analyst, Professional Level, Budget Strategy Office from Budget Bureau. And from Vietnam, we have Mr. Chung Phan Phu, Deputy Head of Division, Set Budget Department, Ministry of Finance. I believe this would enrich experience and knowledge for all participants. We will hear and learn from them. We will hear and learn from them how the adoption of fiscal policy due to COVID-19 has been implemented and measured. So before starting, maybe I will inform the time we have for this session. So this session will be about 95 minutes and will end at around 11:50 Korea Standard Time on 9:50 in Indonesia and this country in Asia. And the presentation time is maximum 12 minutes for each presenter. So please kindly manage your time. After the three countries presentation, we will have Q&A session. So without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Song Yong Kwon from Korea to present. So for Ms. Sun, the time is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Kunta. Good morning. I am Sun Young Kwon, and I'm very glad to have an opportunity to share our Korean experience today. The contents I'll deliver today is what fiscal responses Korean government has done and will be doing to tackle COVID-19 crisis. This is the table of more specific contents I'll be discussing. Starting from what economic impact COVID-19 has given to us, total 4 rounds of supplementary budgets to mitigate COVID-19 crisis follows. Lastly, what 2021 budget plan aims and what are the future concerns we need to pay attention to will be addressed. Here is our current
Sorry, I apologize, but am I the only one not seeing the screen in the full screen?
I think we are only seeing a very small screen.
Oh, is it just a small screen?
I think I think you need to change the setting in your at the top, at the sort of top right-hand corner. There are various options for viewing the screen. I had the same problem, but changed the options, and I see now full screen, the presentation on full screen. I think it's a viewing option. Right.
네? 아니 지금 그냥 그 사람 채팅을 잘못한 것 같습니다. 네네. Can you all see the slides?
Yes, we need to check
We'll put up the PowerPoints from the Secretariat side.
Can everybody see the slides?
We can see the slides. Now we see the Secretariat on the big screen. But yeah, once Thailand starts talking, we can see the slides. Yes, we can see the slides.
Then may I continue?
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. So this is our current COVID-19 circumstances, the daily confirmed cases from March to now. By first 2 supplementary budgets, Korea was able to manage daily confirmed cases under 100 through August. However, as you can see in the slide, there has been steep rise during mid-September, and we are facing another steep rise in the cold winter season. Due to the pandemic, negative signs appeared in macroeconomics. For example, the gap between 2019 and 2020 corresponding month, number of employment in 2020 has been lower than in 2019 since the pandemic broke out. You can see in the slide, the blue bricks and red bricks represent the gap. In overall, COVID-19 brought about decrease in GDP growth rate. Especially during the second quarter, there was a sharp decline compared to previous quarter in 2020. In order to recover from such economic difficulties that COVID-19 resulted in, Korean government executed 4 major rounds of supplementary budget. In total, it accumulates to $66.7 billion, which is 13% of the original budget of 2020. Since we have already looked into the first two in May, I'll just briefly discuss on the first 2, and quickly jump into the third and fourth. As COVID-19 became a pandemic since February, Korean government swiftly implemented the first supplementary budget, total of $11.7 billion. Since it was the first supplementary budget, it was focused on disease prevention and also recovery from the economy. Along with the fiscal support, numerous financial support were held as well. On the second round, 1 month after the first one, its sole theme was distributing disaster relief money, and I will mention it again at the later on. In July, we started to consider new economy driving industry in post-COVID era. Only considering the recovery plan from current situation is insufficient to make a significant improvement in our economy. Thus, the Korean New Deal was planned out. Korean New Deal consists of 3 main pillars: promoting digital technology innovation, the Digital New Deal, founding eco-friendly infrastructure, the Green New Deal, and consolidating social protection. The third supplementary budget was approved in order to not only just finance Korean New Deal, but also other policy sectors. As you can see in the slide, $9.1 billion were allocated to stabilize the labor market and $2.4 billion to disease prevention. In short, the third supplementary budget was to give all-rounded support to the economy, to the social welfare system, and to health. Last but not least, fourth supplementary budget was approved in September. Its main focus was to provide better social protection who have become very fragile during the crisis. Since the pandemic is lasting longer than previously expected, extra support for small merchants and small-medium enterprises was crucial. Looking back to all 4 rounds of supplementary budget, these are the significant points that demonstrates Korean government's fiscal policy in response to COVID-19. First, fiscal support was done in massive scale and also in multiple times. As I mentioned before, the total scale of all supplementary budget is equivalent to 13% of the original budget. Also, Korea never had 4 times a supplementary budget within a single fiscal year during last 59 years. Secondly, we strive to implement these budgets as soon as possible, since the budgets remain mere numbers if they weren't to be delivered to citizens. Table below shows the implementation rate of each supplementary budget. What we are especially proud of is the second supplementary budget, because we were able to distribute this disaster relief money to almost all citizens within 2 months. Thirdly, each budget had its own pinpoints. Tailored support was provided for people or sectors that were desperate in that period of time. Lastly, in the second round of supplementary budget, Korea has executed its first universal cash transfer scheme. It has aroused political controversy whether universal welfare is affordable or effective. The answer is still not definite, but one thing certain is that it opened the window to universal welfare policies. Then, did these fiscal measures have substantial effect? Although IMF and OECD predicted that GDP growth rate in 2020 in Korea will be below 0, both institutions comment that active and massive fiscal measures have prevented the economy from being in worse situations compared to other countries. Although 2020 is leaving, the pandemic and its negative impact is still with us. Thus, the new 2021 budget has similar priorities with our past 4 supplementary budgets. As you can see from the slide, 4 main pillars of our new budget are all something we have focused on previously. Especially our post-COVID plan, the Korean New Deal, will still be a main project through next year. In a nutshell, top priorities of the new budget are social protection and economic boost. Looking at the allocation of budget by sector, it is notable that social welfare, environment, energy, and infrastructure, or the SOC, are the sectors that has increased significantly above 10%. This shows that the welfare and investing on new potential leading industries is where the new budget puts emphasis on. However, considerable increase of budget expenditure raises concerns. prospect of future 5-year national debt ratio path rises, the blue line in the slide, while that of fiscal balance ratio falls, the green line. In consequence, Korea is now preparing for legislation of new budget balance rule, the BBR, to ensure fiscal sustainability. The BBR strives for national debt under 60% and fiscal balance ratio less than -3%. I'm well aware that this will be addressed in our consecutive session and very eager to hear more discussion and perspectives regarding this topic. Now that brings us to the end of my presentation, and thank you very much for paying attention. Hope you all be safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yoon Yong Kwon. So I really appreciate your presentation, giving good time, and giving us fiscal policy insight. To keep the time, we will elaborate more later in the Q&A session in the end of this joint session. So now I will go to the Thailand with Ms. Pongbin Kaisiri. So please, Ms. Pongbin, the time is yours.
Hi everyone. Good morning everyone. My name is Pong Kim and I will be a presenter of Thailand today on the topic of Thailand's budget responses to COVID-19. Well, our presentation today will consist of two parts. Part one is overview of government measure and the second part is budget responses to COVID-19. So the first part, we're going to talk about how Ministry of Finance has had 3 phases of fiscal policy to help smoothing impacts from COVID-19. This is the phase 1. We have financial measure, tax measure, other measure, and COVID-19 mitigating measure. As you can see the details here, we have different projects with different budget, but mostly phase 1, we try to support business owners so that their business can go through this downward economy. For instance, during the shutdown, many small restaurants had to close and they lost incomes for a few months. So this phase gonna touch on that side. We're gonna have some soft loan and also like some tax credit for these people. And we also touched this a little bit on the healthcare side by preventions of disease, like providing masks and stuff like that. And then we move on to the second phase. The second phase is mostly targeted more on general public, especially temporary workers, freelancers, and also healthcare workers. We aimed to stimulate the economies to help people be able to live their normal life again. And as you can see here, we have 5,000 baht cash relief for 3 months as a subsidy for employee, temporary worker, and freelance affected by COVID-19. And we also have like personal tax income exemption for healthcare workers. And now we're on the third phase, which we still carrying on the project. We have healthcare measure, remedial measure, and economic recovery measure. For this phase, we try to focus more on tourism sectors and also on private consumption. The famous projects that you might have heard from us is We Travel Together, which we try to make people travel more inside the countries. Government health supports for the hotels, for the plane tickets, and also for like just general eating or shopping. And we also have half and half projects, which government subsidy half the living expense in each day for people. Now we'd like to move on to the second part of the presentation, which is budget responses to COVID-19. So we like to start first on looking back on fiscal year 2020. What we did to cope with the COVID-19 situation is back in April is that we have transferred and dispersed expenditure by reallocated the budget that already assigned for the year, and we pull some money back, those money that each organization didn't use or have like leftover. So we just pull back, like you can see details here. We reduce and disperse current expenditure by 10% and use that to spend on small businesses so that we can help them going on with their business. And we also adjust and disperse capital expenditure less than 1 million baht per item that cannot start the procurement process by March 2020, because that means that they have just a few months left in the fiscal year of 2020. And we think it's going to be better if we took those money and use it on COVID-19 or any other problems that Thailand facing during those time. And as you can see the detail here, we took back functional budget, agenda-based integrated budget, and program on management of public debt, and move it into central fund with sum up to 88,000 million baht. And as you can see, we allocate on three main things that we can help on. One is to solve the problem and mitigate impacts of COVID-19, and second, to solve and prevent problems on natural disasters, and the last one is to solve other unexpected urgent problems. Now looking forward to fiscal year 2021, well, as you can see, normally we did a budget like 1 year in advance, and by May of 2020, that means the budget for fiscal year 2021 is already done. So we have to change a little bit in details to cope with the COVID-19. And what we did is Budget Bureau proposed to Cabinet to approve the adjustment in details of budget expenditure of fiscal year 2021 on May 12, 2020. And as you can see the result, the budget of around 4,000 million baht in total is reallocated to central fund. And looking ahead in fiscal year 2022, we have a new budget priorities. As you can see here, this is the cover of the book, and this book is what we use to allocate the budget, what we plan to improve in 2021 and 2022. This is the four main things that we try to do. The strengthening of local economy. Well, after a disruption from COVID-19, many small business and many employees lost their job, lost their money, and to get back on their normal life, we government try to help that, try to strengthen at the local economy level first. And we think that is what is the first priority things we have to do. Then secondly, the enhancement of national competitiveness for the sustainable future growth. We try to make Thai people, be able to compete level, so that's going to improve them and help them go to international level. Third, the development of human capital and quality of life to drive national development is something that we also try to aim for. We government put some funds into education and also to help people be able to get a job through upskilling, reskilling. And lastly, we try to improve and advance basic enabling factors for supporting the national recovery and development, such as improving public transport, improving logistics. We're gonna support trade and stuff, and we also improve laws and regulations, and also change the Thai economy into digital economy where people know how to use their smartphones and application to help their businesses. And we also want, even though we don't put in here in the slide, but we want to emphasize that in 2022, we also try to increase employment rate and also put job placement as a top priorities. Okay, that's the end of our presentation. Thank you, and we are welcome your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Pongpit from Thailand. So before I continue to Vietnam, I just inform that you can, if you have a question, you can write in the chat, or you can reply in Q&A session after the Vietnam presented. So for next is Vietnam term. So as you might be aware that Vietnam responses toward COVID-19 is considered as one of the success story because the economic growth in the Q3 is already positive, I think. So I invite the speaker from Vietnam, Mr. Chung Phan Phu. So this time is yours, please, Mr. Chung.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today I have some briefing about the Vietnam strategies against the pandemic. As you see, the COVID-19 pandemic first broke in December 9, 2019 in China, where the Vietnam have the highly open economy, shares long border with China. The first detected case in Vietnam is on the last half of January 2020. Then Vietnam quickly stepped up trailing and isolating COVID-19. In fact case, then all to be controlled in early in half of March 2020. Help me initially contain the initial outbreak, while the economic growth started to show the sign of slowing down. Then quickly we had two outbreaks of cases. The first outbreak is happened in last half of the March, and the second one in the last half of July. Yeah, the old measure was taken, but we not control. We not so. As you know, the highly open economy is pandemic coupled with inherently internal challenge in the economy, gradually disrupted economic and social activities, and demonstrated slumping economic slowdown, stagnant productive commercial activity, especially in manufacturing, service, transport, tourism, as part of the population was likely to fall into distress. The problem and the standard point of the Vietnam government against the pandemic is to focus on the pandemic prevention, control, and to fight pandemics as fighting against invaders, and to adopt the dual objectives, first containing the pandemic while we continue to develop the socio-economic. The first one is introduce a consistent fiscal monetary measure in decisive yet agile manner. And as you know, the economic a little bit slowing down. And then it's gradually recover up to in the second quarter and third quarter. Hopefully at the end of the year, the economic growth will reach 2 or 3%. Summaries of the adopted measure was just slide as above. So the fiscal response to pandemic was the first one is rescheduling tax payment. We have VATs, excise, PIT, CIT, and land rent. The second batch introducing is tax release for CITs, environment and protection environment protection fees, other tax and fees getting down. The third one, we do a supplementary budget to support citizens and combat against the pandemic. The next one is lending to the employer to help maintain the wage bill for employees and differing the pension and motor leave contribution payment for both employee and employers. And all the package can last for the time if we lengthen from 5 to 6 months of the years. For the supporting people, we last until 3 months for supporting people. For the result, as a more detail, you can look at the slides for the results of implemented so far. As the end of November, we have some good points on the fiscal package. For example, the entitlement for personnel directly engaged with COVID-19 control, the deferred excise tax domestically manufactured and assembled of automobile vehicles, tax release for CIT, PIT, excise tax import duties, fee and charge, land rent. Some packages it has been slow in implementation. For example, the reschedule of tax payment, CIT, PIT, and VAT, land rents, get support for citizens suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic. But last point I want to mark up is that all the packages are making positive contribution to achievement the dual objective of my country. That's the first that containing the pandemic, while keeping the socio-economic continued development, keep a stable macro environment in the context of economic challenges and even negative growth outside. About the strengths, the fiscal measures are regarded being timely, leaving positive impacts highly appreciated by business communities and providing breathing space existing, retaining productive and commercial activity that's maintaining economic growth. So at the end of November 2020, fiscal packages are basically relatively well implemented. About the weaknesses, that affect the ability to project accurately development and impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Second, targeting the beneficiary user agency to deliver the policy to the informal sector. And the third one is monitor the public policy implementation. For the 2021, we have the National Assembly have approved the budget. In that, we have scouted the measure to deal with the COVID pandemic, while they're keeping the economic growth. Some measure is to be that first one is continue to reduce environmental protection tax for the aviation sectors. Second, to continue just to consider reducing rates on fees and charges. Third one, to reconsider revenues measure on taxes and fees charges to be relevant to actual development. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Em chuyển luôn sang tiếng Anh cho anh tôi có một cái.
Sorry, are you?
Sorry. I would like to some additional for Chung presentation, but I asked my interpreter translate it from Vietnamese to English. Thank you.
So, as you all know, that Vietnam National Assembly had approved the budget estimate for 2021. In that budget estimate of 2021, we have promoted the restructuring of the state budget, in which we give high priority to development to create conditions to maintain economic growth. And the proportion for investment development of Vietnam in 2021 accounts for 28% of the total state budget expenditure. Besides, we also give a high priority to enhancing the capacity for the national reserve, as well as the budget provisions at the different levels to ensure that we can respond to the pandemics and natural disasters in Vietnam. And thirdly, we also enhance expenditure spending for healthcare sector, including the state budget for buying vaccines for people's vaccination. We as well as to buy more medical equipment for first-line medical facilities, and also to give support to doctors and medical workers participating in the healthcare activities. So in the state budget 2021, we have already covered these issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for Vietnam, for Mr. Chung and his colleagues. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have heard all presentation for this session from Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam. And I know you are very curious to discuss further for fiscal policy responses that have been presented by our colleagues. And now it's time for us to have a Q&A. I already know that already many questions in the chat. I will read this question in the chat, and I ask all the presenter can have a response on this. First, I have from Suhas Joshi from IMF, I think, yeah. The question is, I know it's difficulty, but how are countries assessing the actual impact of the COVID measures they are taking? This from Suhas Joshi. I will read three questions. And second question is from Fabian Schneider. Question to our presenters: to what extent have they taken into account the climate impact of the recovery stimulus to ensure sustainability? And the last is from Cambodia, but is from Cambodia, Vichachun. It seems that different countries using different strategy to respond to the COVID-19. Korea has tried to increase about 30% of the total budget, but Thailand has tried to decrease the total expenses by prioritizing some sectors. I would like to ask the expert with strategy is better. Any recommendation from expert? Maybe if Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam can answer, and then the expert here is Bernard and Rian can help too. I read this three first, and then I continue. The question is from Alma Kanan. So please, time for Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam. From Korea first, I think.
Okay. From among many questions, I will answer first to Suhas Joshi about how to assess the impact of the stimulus. I do agree that assessing the impact will be very difficult. In macro sense, we try to monitor the GDP growth rate and the employment rate. But alongside with that, as I mentioned before, we are trying to carefully monitor the implementation rate. We are considering not just the mere implementation rate, but also we have a concept called substantial implementation rate, which is assessing if the budget has actually been delivered to the citizens. For example, the budget could be delivered to the implementation institution, but may not have been yet delivered to the citizens. So we are monitoring, all the line ministries are actually monitoring whether the budget has been delivered fully to the citizens. And every month we are, the MOEF is getting the track of the implementation, or the substantial implementation rate of the citizens. So we make sure that the supplementary budgets and the original budgets are actually being delivered to the citizens. And also, if I answer to the question that Fabian raised, as I mentioned, Korea is now undertaking the Korean New Deal plan. Among the three pillars, there is the Green New Deal plan, which is encouraging the industries to adapt more eco-friendly technologies and infrastructure. Also, we are supporting the enterprises and research institutions to develop more low-carbon technology as well. So I think that is how we are kind of dealing with the climate change impact for sustainability. And also for the Alma's comment, I would like to note that although Korea's new budget plan is similar to the 2020 supplementary budget's priorities, I would like to note that we are not just dealing with short-term stimulus, because the Korean New Deal plan is actually a very long-term plan for us. We are not just considering to tackle the COVID-19 crisis, but also, as I mentioned before, we are dealing with Green New Deal plan and the Digital New Deal plan, which is the very long-term plan to boost our economy. We are trying to invest on economy industries that are potentially be strong in the future. Thank you. That's for us.
Thank you from Korea, Ms. Suzu. How about the Thailand, please? Ms. Pongpin.
Hi, so we'd like to answer the first questions from Suhas Joshi. How we gonna assess the actual impact of our COVID-19 measures is that we're gonna see the GDP growth rate, even though it's declining, but we hope that it's gonna decline at a slower rate, which is sum up to a reduction of declining in GDP growth rate.
Hi.
Excuse me, my name is Tosapon from Market Bureau. I would like to answer some of the questions. Thailand has tried to decrease the total expense by prioritizing some sectors. I would like to answer that we decreased budget because of, you may know, our revenue decrease. But if we see the contribution of to the GDP in Thailand, the government expenditure contribution is 16% to our GDP. But the main factor is we have consumption, domestic consumption that consists of 51% of our GDP. So we focus on the consumption together with the private investments and together with the government expenditure. So we prioritize our budget to support our economy and for the more.
I think the connection is weak.
Okay, so maybe if Thailand is already done, I'm still waiting, and we move to Vietnam. Mr. Chung, could you please answer?
Yeah, in Vietnam, we would like to give some comments in relation to the questions. First, in relation to choosing the measures for COVID-19 response, it can be said that COVID-19 have a lot of impacts on ensuring the supply chain and the liquidity of enterprises. That's why Vietnam chose the measure to maintain the sustainability for enterprises and the minimum living standard for our citizens. That's why the policies of the government of Vietnam is a kind of comprehensive policy, including monetary, fiscal policies, and other policy focusing on different economic aspects. In the presentation of Vietnam, we just focus on the fiscal response. By nature, in Vietnam, we both increase expenditure and reduce spending. We apply both measures. For the area in which we need to increase spending, for example, spending for people, for containing the pandemic, or spending for like reducing tax to give tax incentive for enterprises. This is what we must do, and we have done these measures. We have also to cut spending on some area, and we apply the spending saving in some areas. For the unnecessary spending items, for example, going abroad for business trip or unnecessary procurement, we reduce or we postpone these expenditure items. Even to reform the salary, this program has been approved by the National Assembly, but we have to postpone this program. Because in the difficult time, people are facing a lot of challenges and difficulty, and the government have to share these difficulties with the citizens. Besides, it also helps to save a certain level of state budget if we postpone the salary increase program. In Vietnam, we have a special feature. We have the accumulation from 2019 thanks to increase in budget revenue from the central and local level. Nearly all of these additional revenue were carried over to 2020 to enhance the resources for controlling the COVID-19 pandemic. That's why in the very difficult time of the economy, Vietnam's budget still have an active role, and the budget deficit was very small in comparison with what we estimated. In terms of considering the climate change impacts on the economy, you can see Vietnam is the very first country participated in the Paris Agreement on climate change. Over the past many years, we have pursued the green growth strategy. Vietnam, at the same time, is a country that is greatly affected by the change in the water resources in the Mekong River Delta and natural disasters in the central area of Vietnam. So we are well aware of the need for ensuring sustainable development as well as measures to reduce the negative impacts of climate change. That's why the government of Vietnam have had a target program for climate change. And at the same time, we arrange the central budget and require the local governments to give a priority to investing in projects and infrastructure works to reduce the impacts caused by natural disasters. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you from Vietnam. It's very clear about this response. So I move to the question is from Alma. Oh, it's a lot of questions. Okay, I just read this, yeah, and then you can answer as a glance. First question from Alma is, how have countries balanced the short-term versus the long-term effect of the stimulus packages? Korea noted that next year will be pretty much a continuation of the current stimulus packages. Of course, maintaining stability in the short term contribute to the long term. Is this the experience with other countries as well? This is from Anani, and then from I think this already one question from Amani, and then before Cambodia said they want to hear from the expert about this the better strategy. Maybe I ask Pak Bernard and Pak Fabian if we have a response to the Cambodia. But before this, I invite Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, and Vietnam to answer the Ms. Alma Kanani question. So please, Korea to respond.
I think Korea did respond actually to my question as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah.
I think it did. Okay. But of course they can repeat. It was I think towards the end of when they responded to the previous questions, I think they responded to my question.
Oh, I see. Okay. Is another response from Korea? If not, we move to Thailand or Vietnam.
Yeah, we can move on to Thailand and Vietnam. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. So please, Thailand.
Yes, we kind of the same with Korea. We have both short-term and long-term projects. Like short-term, like I already mentioned, we travel together or half projects, which is gonna last for only like 3 to 6 months. But we also have a long-term measures such as soft loan and something that's gonna help with SME and small businesses, which is gonna last for like 1 to 3 years. And what we're trying to do is that we want to improve the employment. We want to put more job placement for our Thai citizens, and I guess yes, our short-term measures gonna impact the long-term measures as well, since people gonna have more normal living. We help them in their living expenses as we could, and we hope that gonna generate that better life in the future, long term.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Vietnam, you have a response?
We totally agree with the idea from Korea and Thailand. In Vietnam, you may know that we have a 5-year plan and the rolling 3-year plan. And in setting the objective for the next 5 years, we also consider that the impact of COVID-19 is not only within on 1 year, but it will linger for many years. Even though we have the vaccination for the citizens, it would take 1 year or 1 year and a half to contain the pandemic, so that by mid-2022, we can go back to the situation before COVID-19. And during this time, we have to face that the revenue growth may not be catching up with the economic growth, and the budget expenditure has to be increased in order to stimulate the economic growth. And we have a longer term plan as well. Yeah, that's all for my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. This is clear. Before I move, I think Alma, could you, as an expert in the PEMNA, could you respond to the Cambodia question about the which is better?
Sure. I mean, frankly, the response to that is the main objective is really to stimulate demand and also to address, shortages and sort of stimulate consumption so that you can maintain, those sectors in the activity that can really keep going. So if you can do this by increasing the sort of size of the pie, so to speak, like Korea did, they did it because they were able to do it. So they had more resources, and therefore they increased the total budget by 30%. In the case of Thailand, maybe they didn't have the opportunity to increase the total pie, so they relied on reallocation of resources, on reprioritizing budget expenditures to actually shift resources to those sectors that would have a higher impact on increasing consumption and stimulating demand. So I think that's how I would actually tackle that question. So it's not that one is better than the other. Ultimately, the objective is to stimulate demand, to stimulate consumption, and make sure that small businesses actually can maintain their operations and pay their employees. So if you can do this if you have available resources and you can increase the total size, yes, that is great. But if you can't do that, then perhaps reprioritizing budget expenditures is the way to go. So it depends on the circumstances of the countries and their fiscal positions. That would be my response.
Thank you, Alma. So I think we have all this response to the question, and it's very even though we have the response, but this policy have some flexibility and maybe different from one country to other countries depending on the situation. I agree about that. And in the chat, we didn't have any more question, but if everybody want to have a question, you can raise hand. So please, we still have time until, in addition time, it's 9:50, so it's around 25 minutes more. Does anybody want to share something, or just have a question, or share what happened in your country? Please raise your hand. I didn't see it.
Pak Kunta, I think Mr. Suhas Joshi from the IMF raised hand to make comment.
Yes, I just wanted to add to what you said, Alma. I mean, it's a question of not whether you are decreasing expenditures or increasing resources. It's a question of creating fiscal space. And that can be done, as you rightly said, in two ways, either reduce expenditure or increase the resources available. So it's basically the impact is the same. The tool that is used, the methodology that is used is different. But the impact is all the same. It's just a question of how you create fiscal space to provide for those additional expenditures. That's just wanted to add that.
Actually, I think in the response from Thailand, there is an interesting angle, Pak Kunta, if I may comment.
Yes, please.
I think what they say is that one of their objectives was not to create that stimulus by, quote unquote, increasing the government intervention or the government expenditures or the role of the government in stimulating the economy, right? They wanted to use this stimulus package to stimulate the private sector to invest more, to provide more for exports. So that is a very interesting angle actually to think through. So you don't just push money out of the budget, increase the fiscal deficit, and tomorrow you cannot go back. But you actually stimulate economic activity in order to have it in a more sustainable way in the future. That doesn't mean that Korea didn't do it in the same way. It just did it through different means and tools. But it's an interesting angle, the response from Thailand. So I just wanted to note that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Alma and US. I think we have two more questions. One from Vietnam, one from Philippines, and one from Indonesia. I will read it first. It's very hard to read. Sorry. From the, what is this? From the Vietnam is how are you addressing the weaknesses you identified, specifically the targeting of beneficiaries and use of agencies to deliver the policies to the informal sector, the monitoring of policy implementation. And from Indonesia, I have, as we should learn from 2020 to have a better year in 2021. Based on the effectiveness of the policy measures that have been implemented, some might be effective and some are not. For the effective measures, what should countries do to make it effective? On the other side, on the not effective measures, what are challenges that countries are facing? Should we continue the not effective measures and make them effective, or should we change the measures? Okay, it's very good. Okay, there are two questions from Vietnam and from Philippines and from Indonesia. So please start from consecutively, Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam. Please, Korea first.
I thought the question was, can I answer the question later on?
Okay. Okay, no worries. Thailand, please.
So far, we think that we cannot really see one of any measures can be not really effective. I mean, in general, they are effective, but we cannot really measure how effective each measures are. So I think it's kind of hard to, tell if we're gonna continue it or not. But for some projects that already ended, we consider doing it again or maybe continue it. Like for example, we have Hakka project. We give like co-payment for Thai citizen to 3,000 baht, and it's turned out to be good. People want more, so we increase the budget to 3,500 baht, and also add more people to join the program, more on something like that. And I think it's still new to us all in every country, so we just try our best to come up with new projects or continue the existing project, and hope that we can recover our local economy soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see the question from Vietnam, yeah, but okay, please, Vietnam, to answer.
Yeah, would like to answer when we implement the measures to stimulate the economy and support enterprises and to help people to overcome the difficulties and challenges of the pandemic. Over the past 1 year, taking these measures, we can see that the Vietnamese measures basically are the right measures and effective one. That means we touch upon the right beneficiaries and the right problems. The problem for Vietnam is that at first, when we issue the policies, these are emergency policies, so we do not have a good coverage. But after that, we recognize the weaknesses and we increase the coverage. I mean, increase the number of beneficiaries in our program. For example, tax defer in 2020, at first we just focused on tourism, aviation sector, and some other sector heavily impacted by COVID-19. For example, sectors related to import of raw materials from abroad. But later on, we recognize that there are the spillover effect on other sectors as well. So we have to revise our policy to add more beneficiaries and sectors into the program, and that revised program took effect right in 2020. The second problem in implementing policy of Vietnam is that comparing the initial estimate and the implementation, there is a rather big gap because we didn't have experience in estimating the uncertainties, and we didn't take into account how the pandemic affect the revenue of enterprises. At first, initially, when we want to reduce a tax for enterprises, we assume that it will take around $9 billion for that program. But in fact, the just $4 billion less than 50% can be implemented due to a simple reason that when the pandemic happened, the revenue of enterprises is reduced, and the tax amount that they have to pay to the state budget is also reduced, and then they have no revenue at all to reduce the tax. So this measure cannot help enterprises much. So it is also policy experience we can draw from what we have implemented. And through the experiences that we have gained in 2020, as we have presented, we will continue to implement these policies in 2021. And the policy which we think is very efficient is the tax defer and reduction for enterprises, as well as to expand the time for tax payment. So it will not reduce the state budget revenue within 1 year, because instead of paying at the beginning of the year, they can pay tax at the end of the year. So that means the state budget revenue will not be affected, but enterprises have certain resources for their business. So they can increase their working capital and more resources to invest in their production and business. So we will continue to take this measure in 2021. But how to ensure the balance of the budget is a question, but it is not too difficult for us. So that's the experiences of Vietnam that I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Vietnam. I come back to Korea. If you want to have a response.
Okay, thank you. For the question from Indonesia about how should we assess the effectiveness and what are the future things we have to do. For Korea, we do assess the effectiveness of the policy expenditure. And for that, if the results are not so good, then we ask the line ministry to come up with some improvement plan. Or if the results are seriously bad, then we do consider to decrease the budget for that policy, but we do not directly decrease it, but we give advice to the budget division about considering the decrease of such policies. Yeah, that would be the answer for us.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I have two more questions. It's from Pirnat and Fabian. Pirnat asking about in Korea's presentation, we reported on the implementation rate of the various stimulus packages. Did the other countries track this? Would have been some of the challenges to getting funds to the target audience, and the program funds fully used by the target. I think this is Vietnam and Thailand will have a response on this. And the second question from Fabian, he asked about it would also be useful to have a bit more details on how Korea measures implementation of the different policies. This is very relevant for all PEMNA countries. This is a question from for Korea. So I asked Thailand and Vietnam to respond the Bernard question, please.
Okay, so how we track it, since we are budget bureau of Thailand, so we can track the percentage of budget used in each package. And so far, only the half program already finished. We got a full number of registered people, and we project that 100% of the budget prepared for this package will be used. But for other projects, it's still ongoing, so we cannot really sum up the implementation rate and the percentage of budgets that's going to be used. But we want to emphasize on that for the half project. We see that since it's 100% acceptance rate, and we think it's good that. Oh no, sorry. I want to answer on the second questions that what have been some of the challenges to getting funds to the target audience. But we didn't have problem with that because, for example, we have like SMEs program, and people that can attend the program has to be like SME businesses only. So I think it's really target the audience. And for like the half project, we want it to be with general public, general people. So I think it's already reach the audience that we aim for, and I think that's it. I think that's all we can track so far. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Vietnam, please.
Vietnam, we have a system to monitor and supervise from district, from local levels. So it can be said that the policy implementation in Vietnam has been reported to the central level for, actions if needed. Here, it can be said that the programs that have been ongoing in Vietnam in 2020, we have the medium level of implementation, reaching more than 50% of the objectives that have been set from the beginning. In some of the sectors or some target groups, we even achieved 90% of the objectives set. For example, in Vietnam, we have the program to support the poor, near poor people and people who receive the social welfare from the government. For these groups, they have a support for 3 months, and we have a made payment 100% to this target group. So it can be said that in terms of the experiences for monitoring the program, the best way is that we use the bottom-up approach, and we rely on the reporting system of the state treasury and the finance institutions. And in terms of the resources, as I said before, the resources to stimulate the economy and to provide support to the citizens, we use the resources, I mean the incremental budget revenue collected in 2019 for the use in 2020. Apart from this, we take from the budget surplus, the revenue surplus. The increase in the budget expenditure, budget deficit in 2020. And another source is from the savings of recurrent expenditure. And it can be said that it has been lucky that we had the year 2019 as a very successful year, and that creates a very good foundation and room for us to implement the economic and fiscal policies in 2020. Thank you very much.
I think the video is off for Pakunta. Pakunta, are you here with us?
Perhaps Korea might want to respond in the meantime to the question that Fabian had asked.
Okay, for the question from Fabian, how the procedure that Korean government tracks the implementation rate is through the D-Brain system, the digital system that we track the budget and the implementation. It's the digital system for all central government and the local governments, so we can track all policy implementation rate there. And at the first period of the year, we set to get Minister of Finance and Minister of Home Affairs and all the line countries, line ministries, and the local governments set together their yearly and quarterly goal for the implementation rate. For the line ministries, the Minister of Economy and Finance, they set the goal for the line ministries, and we do coordinate the bits of it. And for the local government, the Minister of Home Affairs coordinate with local governments to what their goal should be for the implementation rate. And we do hold monthly meetings. Through monthly meetings, we gather ministries or the local governments with low implementation rate, and we discuss how we could increase the rate and what are the obstacles and the challenges they face right now. So we, Ministry of Economy and Finance and the Home Affairs, try to solve those obstacles so that the line ministries or local governments could enhance their implementation rate. Thank you.
Sorry, I lost my signal. Before I read another question, maybe I ask another country that have a comment from PEMNA question. It's about the the other countries are track the implementation of the various stimulus packages. If other country will want to share some of this experience, any? Maybe from it's my privilege from Indonesia. You want to share something to respond about this Bernard question? Or the country like Myanmar? Okay, first from Indonesia, you have some response?
Heru, Pak.
Yeah, please, Heru.
Yes, thank you, Pak Punta, for the opportunity. Actually, now we are working to have this kind of how to track the how we use the money, and I think our colleague from the Treasury already done some works on it by tagging the account. So we call it the National Recovery Program, and by tagging that program, we can identify whether this program under the program of we call it PEN, Program Pemulihan Nasional Economic Recovery Program. And I think this is the that we can use to track whether this money under this program is disbursed already or not, and how much. And I think under Pak Punta chairmanship with the minister, I think we have even now even more, we quite frequent every week. There's a meeting to track the disbursement of this and whether this goes to the target. I think that's what we've done so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Heru from Indonesia. Other country, maybe Malaysia? You have some response about your experience in your country? Any from Malaysia? No, maybe I move to Philippines, please. Any response from Philippines? Okay. Okay.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, please.
Good morning. This is Assistant Secretary Kim De Leon from the Department of Budget and Management, and we will note the sharing of our colleagues from other countries, and of course, we share some of their experiences insofar as reviewing our budgetary position in order to respond to the effects of the pandemic, and we have taken note of some of their efforts that we can also utilize for future policy decisions that we would implement in the course of the ensuing year. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I move to put other questions. We still have two questions, I think. Yeah, if I'm not wrong. What is this? From Santilda. Congratulations to Korea for 4-round supplementary budget. We like to know the procedure for approval of supplementary budget for 4 times with legislative and executive ministries. And the second is from Sayon Sos from Cambodia. Among the government intervention mentioned such as tax measure, cash support to poor household, SME support, with measure would be recommended to most effective. Okay, so about the effectiveness of this policy. And what else? Okay, this from this another two question is from for Myanmar to Korea and the Cambodia, from science source to Cambodia about the effectiveness of this policy. So please, I ask Korea to respond first.
Thank you. The procedure to for approval of supplementary budget is actually very similar to original budget. The central government hand over to the National Assembly their supplementary budget plan, and then the National Assembly will screen the budget plan around 2 weeks. It will be shorter than the original budget. So then if the National Assembly approves it, then we get the supplementary budget. It is nearly identical, but just a shorter procedure of the original budget. Thank you.
Thank you. So other countries like Myanmar, Vietnam and Thailand, which was respond for Sun Chu about the which measure would be recommended to be most effective about the intervention such as tech measure, cash support to poor household, and SME support. Yes, I think it's already mentioned before. Yeah. But if you have some response from Vietnam and Thailand.
I'm from Thailand. Well, I think this question is really hard to answer because it depends on the circumstance of how your business or like economy doing at that time. Like for example, we support SMEs because during the shutdown, the SME affected the most in terms of like their business. They cannot hire people. They don't have enough revenues to keep going. That's why we have some support for them. And another example is that we travel together. Tourism sector also affected a lot since Thailand depend on money from tourists, from foreign tourists. Like for example, we have like Phuket, which we have many tourists visited each year, but now many hotels have to shut down during that. So that's why we launched some campaigns to support them. So I think I cannot say which is gonna be the most effective, but it depends on which area doing the worst and which area needs support from the government. Thank you.
Yes, I agree with that. Maybe Vietnam will have a response.
Yes, for Vietnam, in terms of the supplementary budget, we have two clear targets for the budget revenue increase in 2020. We have to ask for permission of the Standing Committee of the National Assembly for using it. And we did it in April 2020. And for the use of the budget expenditure for 2020, we also have deficit for the dealing with budget deficit. Then we also asked for permission from NA, and NA also approved in October. So that means we still have to submit to the National Assembly committees, but during the implementation for the decision that the government can make immediately, we often make immediate decision. Take, for example, for deferring tax payment, the government can issue a decision for taking effect immediately, but for tax reduction or adjustment of tax types, we still have to ask for permission of the National Assembly. So that is related to the authority for decision making. For policy selection, I agree with Thailand that it depends on the context of different countries. The selection of what sectors to be supported, it is based on the actual situation. It is difficult to say right now what measures are better than what. We can just say what experiences are better. That's all from Vietnam. Thank you.
Thank you. We still have 5 minutes left before I wrap up. We still have 2 questions to Korea. One from Philippines and one from Bernard. From Philippines to Korea, they ask, can we assume that the 4 supplemental budget are financed by new revenues or income? And Bernard asking, in the May 2020 webinar, Korea mentioned a policy of advance payments to suppliers for goods and public works. Was this policy continued in the rest of the year, or will it continue in 2021? So please, Korea.
To answer the question from Robert De Leon, we do, to finance the 4 supplementary budget, we use multiple instruments to finance the budget. We used reserved funds, and we also reallocated the original budget to finance new policies. And we also issued government bonds to finance the budget. So some are new incomes, but some are new revenues, but some are not. To answer question from Bernard, we are not planning to do the advance payments to suppliers for goods, because the plan for that stimulus, for that prepayment plan was originally to not use additional budget for it. In other words, we thought the coronavirus would end earlier than we do see it now. So we thought the coronavirus would end in summer. So we thought that using the expenditure that would be held in the winter season to the spring and summer season will be effective, because we will not have to use additional budget, but still we could boost the consumption on the period when the COVID will be more serious. However, since the COVID-19 is lasting longer than we expected, if we want to prepay the supplies and the goods, we do need to have additional budget to pay for them. So we thought it would be not appropriate anymore, so we do not plan to do it for the next year. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we reached the end of the first joint session. I would like to thank Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam for the presentation and everyone for your participation. I just have a wrap up a little bit. In this session 1, we're talking about how we respond to the COVID-19, even though every country have a different program or activities, but as a whole, we have the same situation and condition and the same response. There are 3 focus when we have responses. First, in the response to the health and to social, improve the purchasing power of the poor people using the social safety net, and support the industry to make industry with not hurt a lot. So this is the response on that, and we agree that this condition is an extraordinary situation. So all the response from the country is extraordinary too, based on the situation in the countries. So I think this is our wrap up, and I believe that we are able to learn from multiple countries' experience that we are now today, and we could get fresh ideas and policy options to battling COVID-19 and accelerating economic recovery in the next year. And we hope we have a good situation in 2021. We hope that the vaccine will have a good impact for us. This is from me. Thank you. And thank you again to Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam. I return back to Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Kunta. We will resume after a short break. Please back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Hello, can I have everyone's attention? Welcome back. We'll now begin with the second joint session. This session will be moderated by the acting TCOP chair, Ms. Tang Thi Tui. Ms. Tui, whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Good morning, our two co-chairs, and good morning, participants, ladies and gentlemen. We have had a very hard session regarding how countries have responded to COVID-19 impacts and the policy measures and the budget plan for 2021. Let's now listen to another topic which is not less interesting than those in the first section. Balancing fiscal sustainability and short-term stimulus. How governments are responding to revenue gaps, debt limits and cash limits, and the demand for more spending, as well as considerations in balancing the trade-offs. And I hope that this session will contribute to the new fiscal measures, as well as implementation of the short-term stimulus measures in the context of COVID-19, which affects the entire economy of the countries. So I believe that in each of the countries here, there are the principles for management, organization, and division of responsibilities, which I believe differs from country to country. But the challenges that we face are similar. That's why with 90 minutes for this session, how can we discuss and we have active discussion so that we can draw out the useful lessons and experiences for all of the participating countries. And we hope that you have had the documents in your hand. In this session, we are going to have two speakers. One comes from the World Bank, and one is our colleague from the Philippines. We will also have the opportunity to listen to the representatives from the three countries to share their country updates regarding the policy responses and the actions to respond to COVID-19 pandemic impacts. The representatives have been registered Vietnam, Indonesia, and Myanmar. We also encourage other countries to share their country updates and situations. And each country would have 2 to 3 minutes to share their updates. Then we listen to the PEMNA Secretariat to share the results of the PEMNA COVID-19 survey. Regarding the updates from the countries, from PEMNA countries, in terms of the fiscal policy that they have adopted, and the other measures in order to recover their economies. As well as the assessment of the implementation and effectiveness of the measures adopted. The survey has been circulated to the member countries for both T Corp and B Corp. And the survey has just been completed in recent days. And finally, we come to the Q&A session. To start session 2, I would like to introduce Mr. Urgis Islamas, the World Bank senior economist. Mr. Urgis Islamas is a senior economist at the East Asia and Pacific Chief Economist Office, where he leads the biannual East Asian Pacific Economic Update. Recent analytical works include studies on productivity spillovers, propagation of shocks through the input-output matrix, sudden stops in financial flows, and the ability of remittances to smooth consumption. He holds a PhD from Georgetown University. Prior to joining the World Bank, Urgis was an assistant professor at Vassar College. He has published on behavior of consumption and investment growth in emerging markets and developing economies, risk sharing, remittances, and growth spillovers. His broader research agenda on exchange rate pass-through and its implication for monetary and fiscal policy, effects of financial crisis on sectoral output and employment, and the link between hedge fund behavior and returns in the US and emerging markets. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Urgis Islamas to make the presentation on the fiscal support in East Asia Pacific. So the floor is yours now, Mr. Islamas.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me all right. Thank you very much for inviting me to this great event. Thank you to the organizers and for everybody in the room being here to listen. So I have tailored the presentation to fit the event, but this is based on a recent publication that we had at the World Bank, so mainly the biannual East Asia and Pacific Economic Update. And there we basically took a broad view of the effects of COVID on the region's economies. And we also took a deep dive on the fiscal aspects of what was going on with COVID. So both how the government responded and how those responses will affect the budget, how our governments were able to finance those gaps, and more importantly, how to think going forward. So I will try to selectively bring a few pieces from the economic update to the discussion, and mainly the pieces that have to do with the fiscal developments in the region. So the new title is mine, is changed. It's basically COVID-19 and the fiscal support in East Asia and Pacific. And hopefully this my talk will help to bring like a big picture, like a regional view of the effects of COVID in the region's economy, and then the country experts can hopefully complement the discussion by giving more country-specific examples. Sorry, I'm having a problem. Okay, so to get started, basically, even when we wrote this update, it was no news that COVID-19 has sharply reduced the economic growth in the region. What we thought would be interesting, and what I'm doing in this presentation, is basically to bring the big picture that I promised you, and to put things in a perspective and to see how big is this reduction in growth, is this effect of COVID on the region's economic growth. If you look at the projections for 2020, the comparable periods in time for East Asia, for developing East Asia, we have to go back to the times of 1967 and 1976 for China, and 1998 for the rest of the region, to basically have a basis of comparison for how deep this recession was. And we can guess that this big effect on economic growth, a recession of this extent, will leave some scars in the region's economy, and especially in its finances. And that's exactly what happened. So most countries focused on containing the disease and also providing relief to households, firms, and to also basically to the health sector. But recovering and growing remains a struggle. The fiscal situation, luckily in the region, appears better than in previous crises. So basically the region entered, or the economies in the region entered this crisis with better macroeconomic framework than they did in previous crises that we are comparing them with. But some weaknesses remain, and especially what we flag out is a low revenue mobilization in some countries in the region, and also in a few countries a high reliance on indirect taxes. Now, what I want to basically put out there, and hopefully it will stay with you guys, is that what we find is that due to these weaknesses, due to the scars that are left by COVID, growth rates in the region, and now we're talking about potential growth, like growth going forward, could be 1% lower every year for the next decade. It can be even more than that, but we stopped our analysis, we stopped our projection 10 years from now, so we didn't go more than that, unless there is meaningful reform. And while not all of these weaknesses will come from their weak fiscal positions, let me say right now that the weak fiscal positions and the inability to basically bring in more capital because the countries will not be able to afford as they did before, is part of this story, and that's something that we should really be worried about. So going back to the story, in many aspects, there's been a successful containment of COVID-19 in the region. Like, if you look at this map, which was drawn with some of the recent numbers, this is the number of new cases. So basically, what we are seeing is that blue is bad, lighter blue is actually better, and even though East Asia has had many problems, it's lighter than some of the other regions. So on average, there is this tendency to say that there's been a successful containment, and we've seen some cases of success in dealing with the disease and containing the disease. And this includes not only high-income countries in the region, but also countries like China, Vietnam, Thailand, and so on. But there are exceptions, and especially the number of cases remains high. Actually, it's still growing in Indonesia. It remains high in the Philippines, and recently, as of the recent couple of months, has been growing in Malaysia and Myanmar, which brings back worries about a second wave in the region, also in other countries, and about the fear that the COVID is not. We are not out of the woods yet, but COVID is still there, and with it will come not only the human tragedy, but also the economic effects. Now, what does this mean about the country in the region? Well, as we know, COVID very quickly, it did start in the region, but it became a global pandemic, and it affected the global economy. Due to that, not only that the region was dealing with a COVID shock, with the health aspects of the COVID shock, then it was dealing with disruptions from the COVID-19, which was basically closures of businesses, people staying at home and not going out to spend money, so loss of consumption, disruptions, at least temporarily, in global value chains, which affected production. So it was not only dealing with that, but now it was risking to deal also with the reverberations from a recession that overtook all the countries in the year. So according to World Bank projections, more than 90% of the economies in the world will be in recession in 2020. And even though we are now starting to tell these stories that there is recovery, and we are seeing economies in China and Vietnam, ending the year with positive growth, our projections are that that growth in China will be 2%, in 2020, and in Vietnam is slightly higher than that. But still, what we see here on the left is that the rest of the world is still in a recession. So, and also other countries in the region are still struggling to basically see positive economic growth, and they will for certain end the year on negative territory. So one weakness of the region is that it still has to deal with these reverberations from the rest of the world. And those effects, those spillovers coming from the rest of the world will have different effects on different countries based on their exposure to the rest of the world. And one is the financial exposure, which, it seems like, so far the world has been able to handle like a financial meltdown, and including East Asia and Pacific, but also exposure to trade and remittances. Most countries in the region, like Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, they are heavily reliant on trade to the rest of the world. And some of them, including Cambodia, Thailand, the Philippines, and also many Pacific islands, they're also reliant on the rest of the world on services exports, especially tourism, but also remittances for some of these countries. So we can expect that while trade has been recovering, and the region has actually been well positioned to take advantage of this, and we have seen trade growing in many countries of the region, countries that are more reliant on services exports and remittances, they'll probably see a slower recovery than the rest. And here we can think about Thailand or the Philippines and so on. And again, this evidence that the countries are struggled is corroborated both by macro and also by micro evidence. The World Bank has undertaken these high frequency surveys, both at the household level and at the firm level. And basically what those surveys confirm is that the effect of this shock, of this pandemic, have been large. So there is almost in every country where we were able to take the surveys, a majority of the firms are reporting a drop in monthly sales. And as several rounds of those surveys go on, we are again seeing the same results. And the same thing for households. A large proportion of the households in many countries are reporting a loss of income, ranging from, say, 85% in Myanmar to 33% in Vietnam. But just to emphasize the severity of this crisis, also note that even in Vietnam, which we consider a country that was able to contain a disease and was able to restart, to rebound its economy pretty early, the proportion of firms that report a drop in monthly sales is around 40%. So this is not an easy shock. To stem the pain, governments provide fiscal support to both firms and households. From our calculations, in the developing region, governments have committed around 5% of GDP on fiscal support. While this is less than say, what is going on in advanced economies, it's still pretty remarkable about what's going on. Also, I do want to point out, and this is something that we noticed during the process, that a lot of income support has gone to households on average, right? Some countries, for example, China, focus more on firms, on production side, but our sense was that for many developing countries in the region, households had been neglected by the government. So there was basically this concept of small government, and they were the most vulnerable right now. And many countries rightly focus their aid on households. So what does this mean? So again, we see that most of the fiscal support, although there are like other measures like loan and guarantees, in many countries, the bulk of the support was not on health, but was actually on spending on income and revenue support, which is basically supporting households and also small businesses. This will mean that fiscal positions have deteriorated and are expected to deteriorate by the end of 2020. And these are our projections. So we see like the fiscal deficits widening, and the government debt will increase. I think on average was around 7% of GDP. Should we worry about that? Right. So governments are increasing their debt. First, I mean, almost everybody agrees that this is necessary. That they need to support the households. They need to help the firms. They need to help jumpstart the economy. But many questions arise. So the questions arise about how they are financing that deficit or that increase in debt. Is that increase sustainable? And then what does that mean for long-term growth? And these are some of the questions that we tackled in our economic update. So first, there's been a wide range of fiscal measures to finance the deficit. Here and there, we see pockets of vulnerability, but there was a lot of reliance on domestic borrowing. And in a few countries, some reliance on external borrowing. And in some countries, actually, we saw the central banks interfering and purchasing government bonds, which, so far, their interventions seem to have been effective. They have basically stemmed the panic, and things have gotten better. But of course, we have to watch out. We have to be a little worried, especially when central banks are purchasing government debt. And this is one of the things that we do warn about in our economic update. But generally speaking, there is some case for optimism, right? So if we just look at the big picture, it seems like that the improved fundamentals, the improved economic fundamentals in the region are reflected, and the market perceptions, like when the panic hit and the spreads of these countries shoot high up. Again, although the crisis could have been as bad as many of the previous countries, at least that was the idea back in April and March. The spreads were not as bad as they were back, let's say, during the Asian financial crisis. And also, here on the right side, they were lower than in other emerging market economies. And this was probably due to the better economic fundamentals in the region. So here and there are some pockets of vulnerability, but as I said, mainly they are relying on domestic debt. They've been better at raising revenue, showing some fiscal disciplines. And again, markets have some confidence on that. Here and there, a little bit of worry about the domestic debt being high. It's not necessarily a problem, but it can be a problem if many small corporates or even bigger corporates starts defaulting, and then through the interlinkages in the system, they start basically causing like a widespread panic. And a couple of countries are doing better than others, but overall, I would put it, or we put it, that the AP economies have been fiscally prudent and bearing some existing vulnerabilities, and the size of the shock, they will probably be all right going through this crisis. Now, again, I promise to tie this with economic growth, and the way we try to explain it is that, basically just looking at again, we provide enough evidence, and I invite everybody to read our economic update. Human capital and productivity will be hurt by this pandemic, and so will private investment. I don't want to spend more time on this, but I want to talk about public investment. At the very least, because there is more spending now, because the fiscal space has narrowed in all these countries, so they are more fiscally constrained than they were before, they will not be as able as before to invest in say public infrastructure and public projects, which in the end do add to the capital stock, and that capital stock adds to growth. And indeed, our simulations show that potential growth is expected to decrease in the region, both in China and other economies outside of China, again, unless reform are undertaken. And a huge chunk of it will come from capital, which is these red bars over here, as basically there is less capital to build up on for future growth. Again, the story is a little richer than that, but I do want to come back to how to think about policy. Of course, in the update, we provide an integrated view. Within the first and important thing, I don't want to underemphasize this, is to basically build capacity for smart containment, because if they don't solve the root of the problem, they don't contain the disease, it will be very hard for them to recover and continue to grow. We have to think about how to get people back to school. We have to think how to support firms and also increase productivity. I mean, hopefully, one option is to deepen trade reforms. But two things that I will take a couple of more minutes to talk about is that we should think hard. What are the fault lines? What are the cracks in the fiscal environment in the region? What are some of the problems that we could see, and how to address them? And also, when we're spending, where to focus the spending? What are the main areas that will develop? So, and what we recommend is basically to think hard. Maybe not act right now, because things are we are not out of the woods yet in some countries, but how to think about widening the tax base, probably with more progressive taxation, and also by cutting the spending on some wasteful subsidies. And also, when we think about spending this money, social protection is generally low in the region. And now we have to think hard about not only how to increase social protection to the historically existing groups that some governments know and have documented, but also to the new poor, which is people that were working on the services sector, which before were not the poor that the government was worried about. And now suddenly, because of the disruptions in the services sector, they became the new poor. And how to think about the infrastructure of delivery to this to new poor and the existing poor. So just to give you a little more sense of what we're talking about, is that it's very notable that the orange line here is the developing East Asia. The government revenue is the lowest in East Asia, compared not only to advanced economies, but also to other emerging markets and developing economies. China has a higher government revenue, but then if you take out China, then the numbers are strikingly low. And also it is notable that we still see a lot of spending on, for example, fossil fuel subsidies. So especially during this time when the commodity prices are low, maybe it's a good time, and it could be a nice momentum for some governments, especially some that spend from 0.5% to 2% of their GDP on fuel subsidies. Maybe it's time for them to start thinking how to phase out of them. But more broadly, it's also that especially some governments have been lucky; they have had resources, but those resource revenues have been declining. But also some governments have been relying on indirect taxes. So these indirect taxes are mainly sales taxes, basically consumption taxes, and given this crisis where consumption was affected more than production, first, by these restrictions in mobility, but then later we can conjecture that because of precautionary savings, consumption will be lower. Then the governments who are more reliant on indirect taxes will be basically hurt disproportionately. So thinking long term about how to rely less on these indirect taxes and more on direct taxes, like, for example, progressive taxation on incomes, is something that we also encourage governments, policymakers to think about. And the other side of this was basically how to spend the money and how to think about this infrastructural delivery. And it was also notable that the public spending on social assistance pre-COVID in the EAP region was very low. It was around 1%, whereas it was like quite higher in other regions. Now, granted, most governments in the region, they were able to, they actually committed a lot of money and they spent a lot on protecting the poor. But again, because they don't have that infrastructure there were a lot of inefficiencies and there were delays in reaching those poor. But at the same time, because now they had to figure out how to reach this poor, and all the money that they could spare and all the energy and effort they could spare was basically considered in these transfers, which are more like basically spending on consumption rather than spending on, or at least partly spending on an investment that will help future growth. So therefore, not to be in this situation again, they should think better and more broadly about the safety net. And then once they get their fiscal house in order, and also think about how to invest in the future. I think that I'm going to stop here because I am running out of time. I wanted to give like a big picture of where things stand, and I'm happy to continue the conversation later during the section after hearing the other speakers, and maybe talk about more specific policies and how to think about this. But thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions later.
Thank you, Mr. Islamas. So we have listened to Mr. Islamas from the World Bank to provide to us the overview picture of the impacts of COVID-19 and the fiscal measures and implementation of fiscal measures in East Asia Pacific, as well as the policy hints for governments. Next, I would like to invite the Philippines representative, Mr. Eduardo Anthony Marino. Mr. Marino is currently the director of the Asset Management Service of the Philippines Bureau of Treasury. So the floor is yours now. Mr. Marino is going to share the Philippines' experiences in terms of fiscal trade-off. And please be noted that each of the speakers has about 12 minutes for the presentation. So please, Mr. Marino.
So, first, okay. So good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Bureau of the Treasury and the Republic of the Philippines, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to share our experience and strengthen the PEMNA network. So I will be talking about the fiscal trade-offs, but from the point of view of Treasury, meaning fundraising perspective. So I think this slide here is the national government debt to GDP ratio. Now, keep in mind that that distinction is national government, but I think this is a very good picture of what the trade-off, what was the main trade-off for the country. So basically, we thought before COVID that we were going to. We were driving smoothly along the road to single A, but then with COVID, it turned out that we had to take a dangerous hike in the mountain of public debt. So as you can see, we basically COVID erased 10 years worth of fiscal consolidation efforts. And that is the trade-off that was imposed upon the country and our policymakers. Okay, so more formally, basically, the governments, there's an economic, if not a moral, imperative to spend. Because right now, governments are the only source of economic support in their own countries. And then failure to act because of a misguided sense of fiscal discipline can actually initiate a vicious spiral and will make the economic situation worse. So there are moral and very good moral and economic arguments for governments to spend right now. However, there are constraints to such spending, and the most important part is access to financing. So I think this is straightforward. Doesn't matter how ambitious or good your fiscal stimulus programs are, but if you do not have the hard cash to pay for them, then it's not going to do anything. So it's important that you have before. This is the primary constraint. So can you generate the cash to pay for the programs that you want to do? And since there's no revenue coming because of the pandemic, it's all going to be primarily debt. Second constraint in terms of the size of the spending, the perception. There is a need to manage perceptions of fiscal sustainability. Note the term perceptions there, because in this crisis situation, there's lots of uncertainty that an objective, or let's say a good estimate of fiscal sustainability might be difficult to come by with. So what people have are just perceptions, and there's a really important there's an urgent need to manage that, because perceptions in previous crises can actually lead to self-fulfilling. So if people think that you are not being fiscally sustainable, then they're not going to lend to you. And if you cannot borrow anything, you can't do anything to support your economy, which will make the situation worse. And so basically, the perception will become reality. So there's a need to manage that. Then the third one is the legal and regulatory framework. So I think we can talk about the ideal stimulus package, the size, the content of the program. But ultimately, we are countries, all of us are working in a country with a well-established legal and regulatory framework, and what we can do is going to be dictated by that framework. That those are the main constraints, at least from our point of view and our experience during the crisis. So for the Philippines, how did we address the first constraint, financing? So this the partnership with the central bank is really, really important. So when COVID struck the country around March, we immediately engaged in a repo transaction with the central bank. So that's about 300 billion pesos worth, around $6.25 billion. So right then and there, we knew we had the money to at least tide us over until markets have come down. And that's very important, especially during the early days of the pandemic. Then, of course, it was renewed. In fact, it was increased back in October to 540 billion or $11.25 billion. So it both replaced and augmented the initial central bank support. Now, we cannot completely rely on the central bank, of course. So there is a hard cap on what we can borrow from the central bank, and that's basically 20% of average revenues over the last 3 fiscal years. I think this is one of the more contentious, one of the more controversial aspects of the financing, because there is really, there's a stigma when it comes to central bank financing of the deficit. So basically, it reminds a lot of people that of the debt crisis so many decades ago. But I think this one has been really crucial in the Philippine government's response to the pandemic. The second one is that the central bank has initiated accommodative monetary policy. So they did secondary market purchases, they cut interest rates, and they reduced reserve ratio requirements, all of which gave banks the necessary liquidity and us our financing will ultimately come from that liquidity that these measures have raised. So this is incredibly important in stabilizing our financing sources. Now, in terms of market liquidity, it has been, in general, very accommodative to us. So we had successful global bond issuances both in May and December. And I think for the domestic rates, I think this domestic environment, I think these two pictures show you just how accommodative it has been. So after a brief spike in March, when there's a lot of uncertainty in what's going to happen in COVID, it steadily dropped down to more sustainable, more reasonable levels. So again, the initial central bank support was absolutely necessary to tide us over this massive hike in domestic interest rates. And of course, this is just a 10-year. The left-hand side image is the 10 years, but it's also more or less reflected across the yield curve. So there's a consolidation in yields. So you can see the yellow line here is all of it from 91 days to 25 are much higher during end of 2019 than what it is today. So that's one. Now the second constraint is on the fiscal sustainability aspect. I think this is if you look at the initial program, which is we were expecting at the height of the crisis, we were expecting something like 9.6% deficit as a percentage of GDP. Now, if you take out the context, if you show me a country, if you show other people a country with 9.6% of GDP, devoid of any context, they're going to think that this country is in big trouble. So that's why there really is a need to convince people that this 9.6% is at the start is not. This is a government determined to steer, a responsible government determined to steer the country in very difficult times. So this is not a government being irresponsible, government being responsible. And the thing is, it forces policymakers to put a cap in how much they can propose to spend, because even if people are going to be more inclined to be lenient in their assessment of fiscal sustainability because of the crisis, there is still a need to demonstrate that there's a plan to consolidate your fiscal space over the next few years. So that puts a hard cap. That puts a cap, not a soft one at that, on how much we can actually, policymakers will be likely to increase their policy, stimulus support. Now, the second thing we are doing is that we compare ourselves to our peers. So I think in terms of performance, we just have to make sure that we are aligned with what our peers are doing, and that builds up the credibility, our own credibility. Because if everybody's doing it, then clearly we're doing something right. So that's at least the basic principle there. So this one, the bar graph that I'm showing you is the general government debt. So this is very different from the national government debt, because we are netting out the debt holdings of state-owned enterprises and other sub-sovereign entities. So a lot of our debt, you will see, is actually held by entities owned by the national government. So that helps in managing the perception of fiscal sustainability. And of course, the fact that we're right in the middle of our peers. So we are not the highest, but we're not the lowest. Now, the other constraint, and I think this is related to the discussion earlier on the what's better, more or quality, meaning more targeted realignments towards more targeted interventions. And the answer really on a practical basis is that that it would really depend on what the legal and your regulatory frameworks of each country will be able to allow, will be able to, what you can do under those constraints. So, for example, in the Philippines, there's an interesting provision in the 1987 Constitution, which said that all appropriations bill has to be supported by one, funds actually available, and two, corresponding revenue proposed therein. So I think right now I can just imagine that this the second condition is going to be very difficult to meet under this environment. There's really no revenue incoming. And the first one problem is it's not actually well established, at least for us, what are funds available, because you cannot just look at our, for example, our cash balances and see that's funds available. No, because all of those cash balances are already spoken for. They were there, they were raised, and they were collected to fund a specific this fiscal year's general appropriations act or the budget. So the size of your and the nature of your stimulus package will depend on what you can do under these constraints. How can you navigate these constraints imposed by your own laws and regulations? So that's, I think, one of the important points. So our, of course, my colleagues from the Department of Budget Management will be our experts in identifying what's the hard constraints. But at least this one for the Treasury was in passing the stimulus packages was an important consideration. So those are my slides. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marino, for your presentation. And you have just listened to Mr. Marino sharing the experiences of the Philippines in implementing the fiscal stimulus packages. For example, through the bond issuance, being aware of the fiscal sustainability within the legal framework. And I see a very interesting thing of the Philippines is that Philippines pay attention to studying the experiences of different countries. So this is also the objective of our event here today. And next, we will have member countries sharing experiences on budget responding. I would like now to invite Madam Nguyễn Thị Ngọc Hiếu from the VST of Vietnam, Vietnam State Treasury, to update the Vietnamese situation in relation to the topic. Hello, everybody. Within this morning, Vietnam would like to share the specific policies of Vietnam in responding to COVID-19, and I would like also to add on the measures of the country in relation to dealing with budget deficit. According to the government evaluation in 2020, we have a budget spending a reduction of 3.5% in the National Assembly meeting session. The National Assembly approved the state budget in order to reduce the budget deficit. The government will continue to implement the collection revenues by increasing the budget and to reduce the tax arrear and also to reduce this spending. And then we can conduct the saving to reduce budget expenditure. And then we can increase the borrowing, for example, borrowing to make up for a budget deficit through issuing the domestic budget deficit. That is around 13 billion in 2020. In the process of the market management, we may suffer from the budget deficit, so we issue more government bonds, and also to complete the tasks of the domestic borrowing in comparison with the plan. And we have 1 month in around December to mobilize more money, and then with such situation, the state, the VST can mobilize more capital for making up for the state budget, and we can see that the interest rate is 2.36%. It is a very low level in comparison with ESP, so Southeast Asia countries, which, and also just higher than Thailand and Singapore. In relation to the cash management, the VST have implemented the TSA to focus all of the budget revenue into the State Bank of Vietnam. In 2020, although we have a very strong fluctuation of budget revenue, but the liquidity level can be maintained. The VST always meet the expenditure need of the government at all times. Besides, the state budget can also the cash can also be used when the borrowing cannot be mobilized timely due to the fluctuation caused by COVID-19. The cash management options of the VST have to be adjusted to be close to the practice and reality. In terms of the public debt safety ratio, although the revenue is reduced, spending is increased, and the budget deficit has been approved by the National Assembly of Vietnam, and all the safety ratio can be maintained within the level approved by the government. According to the estimate of end of 2020, the public debt can be 57% of GDP, higher than 2019, but lower than the limit approved by the NA, that is 65% of GDP. The government debt was at 50.8% of GDP. The implementation of debt borrowing is managed within the budget estimate approved by the National Assembly of Vietnam. We also have listened to the leader of the State Budget Department share in his presentation, and also some information have been shared in the first session this morning. And you can see that the government of Vietnam do not develop the economy by all means. We still give a priority to the safety and health of our people. However, the government also promote spending for public investment as a dynamism for economic growth to both contain the pandemic and to recover the economy after the pandemic. According to the assessment of the government, the GDP growth rate in 2020 of Vietnam will reach 2.5 to 3%. It is similar to the IMF forecast of 2.4%. And you can see that the pandemic in Vietnam has basically contained socioeconomic activities can still be carried out, but within strict control. So that's all of my update from Vietnam. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hiếu, for your update. And now I would like to invite the representative from Indonesia to make an update, Madam Santano. Mr. Rosindoku Soniaman. From the budget department. Yes, so it is your floor. Thank you. And your country should keep your presentation within 2 to 3 minutes. Thank you.
So, hello, Madam, Indonesia or Myanmar? So, Indonesia or Myanmar? So, Indonesia or Myanmar? Really? Hello.
Indonesia MOF turn to speak.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you and good morning, everybody. I would like to share the what is the comments on Indonesian updates with regard to these topics about the balancing fiscal sustainability and short-term stimulus, especially with how the governments are responding to revenue gaps, cash, and debt limits, and also demand for spending. So this is actually like a trade-off. And thank you for the moderator. Yes, if we, as we might well aware, actually this pandemic brings like inevitable threat of health crisis, and economic recession, and that has been responded by our colleagues in the morning shared that it is responding by the government everywhere, including in Indonesia. The government of Indonesia has provided like fiscal stimulus to mitigate the adverse impact of the pandemic since the beginning by setting up the legal framework as an umbrella for the COVID-19 related policies. This regulation is crucial for the government to take unprecedented and extraordinary policy for handling COVID-19 and economic recovery. As you may aware, in Indonesia, we have the fiscal rules like 3% deficits and also 60% debt to GDP. The regulation called the Perpu, or this is the government regulation number 1, 2020, and now it's already amended to law number 2, 2020, and then it sequentially followed by the adjustment of the state budget to create fiscal space to finance the extensive funding needs to combating the pandemic and mitigating the economic impact. Under the government regulation number 1, 2020, we have reallocated, refocused the budget and widen the deficit up to 6.34% of GDP as a part of the counter-cyclical policy. And with respect to the budget, we see that the pandemic has significant impact toward the decreasing revenue in 2020 from the initial budget. The decrease is about 39 billion US dollar. So, and this is very significant. And on the other hand, the decreasing of the revenue, and also on the other hand, the government has introduced an expansionary fiscal policy, as a significant amount of government has been released to mitigate the adverse impact of the COVID-19. We call this as a National Economic Recovery Program, or PEN. Under PEN program, the government provided 695.2 trillion allocated in 6 important pillars, which include the health, social protection, small medium enterprises, corporation, businesses, as well as sector and regional government. And it results in millions of poor and vulnerable peoples are benefited from the social protection, so that they could maintaining their purchasing power. Millions of small businesses are supported so that they would sustain their businesses. Companies are giving various relaxation and also facilities so that they wouldn't lay off and can quickly recover. And as the combination of a decreasing revenue and also increasing spending, this is like a two opposite way, and as a result, the deficit is consequently increasing. But we have increasing about 3%. This is like 6.34 I mentioned before, and but this is already have a legal framework, like the government issued the government regulation, and this is surpassed the budget law before, but then it's also discussed by Parliament and already approved. To finance this, there are various resources, including debt. And with regard to this debt, it increased from 29.42% of GDP on the original budget 2020 to the estimated of 38.67% of GDP by the end of this year. The government of Indonesian expansionary fiscal policy seems like have a strong impact toward the economic growth. We see the turning point already in economic growth has shown a positive improvement from in quarter 2 2020 we have minus 5.32% growth, and in quarter 3 it decreased, still minus, but it decreasing, become 3.49%. And we see from the indicators that all important components such as consumption, investment, and export seems like already bottom out. It suggests that the strong government involvement in spending, including providing stimulus, fiscal stimulus, has greatly support not only the government consumption itself, but also the consumption and purchasing power as a whole. So it underlines that the extensive stimulus provided by the government seems like have a pivotal roles in preventing the more severe of the pandemic, and also created some caution to protect the poor, businesses, as well as the economic fundamentals. I think that is the update from the Indonesian side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, representative of Indonesia. We still have another member who win on soul share. I would like to invite Madam San U, Director of Budget Department, Ministry of Planning, Finance and Industry of Myanmar.
Thank you. First, first in Myanmar, the first confirmed COVID-19 case was reported on 23rd March 2020, and then now the local transmission had been the rapid increase in our country. Next one. So to mitigate the economic and social impact of the pandemic, the government of Myanmar launched the COVID-19 relief plan CERB on 27 April 2020. So in line with the CERB goal, so we are doing the fiscal response for the monetary stimulus. For the macroeconomic environment, CBN has reduced the interest rate rise 0.5%, 1%, and 1.5% respectively. For investment, trade, and banking sector, so we have established the COVID-19 fund with a capital of 200 billion Myanmar kyat, exempted 2% of the income tax levy in advance for export, a permission for renewal of the license fee. We also provide the credit loan to the macro business and also credit loan for the farmer and the Myanmar National Airline. For laborers and workers, we have provided the labor benefit extension, and also we have provided cash and in-kind transfer to the vulnerable household and IDP camp, cash support to senior citizens and pregnant women, free distribution of book and stationery, buying reserve food. We also provide the special allowance to co-crew worker and the land loan to the government staff. So next one. We have promoted the use of available of the mobile payment service to promote the innovative product. For the healthcare system, we have located expenditure for importation of the medical-related product, upgrading the hospital, buying COVID-19 prevention and control equipment, and expenses for the facility quarantine. I would like to share about the financing source to implement the CERB. The first one is the relocation from the state budget up to 10% of the 2019-20 original budget, strategic allocation to COVID-19 as part of the regular supplementary grant process, regular budget contingency fund, and the taking concessional loan from the international organizations such as IMF, World Bank, JICA, ADB, and so on, restructuring the existing loan program, debt service suspension initiatives, and the donation from abroad and from the Myanmar people. So because of the COVID-19 effect, government revenue is declining. However, still we need to use the expenditure, so we face the higher budget deficit than the estimated. In fiscal year 2020, temporary actual budget deficit is 6.15%, and in fiscal year 2020-21, we estimated the budget deficit is 5.29%. However, we can face the higher deficit level. So I would like to present about the budget priority for the fiscal year 2020-21. Electricity, energy, transport, communication, road, bridge, education, health, and social protection expenditure are estimated as the priority, and also the allocation expenditure for the economic recovery during pandemic and the beyond pandemic are also prioritized. So let me conclude here, and thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, the representative from Myanmar. Ladies and gentlemen, due to time limitation, I would like now to invite the PEMNA Secretariat to announce the integrated result from the survey updating the situation of PEMNA members. So it is your floor, representative of the PEMNA Secretariat. Thank you.
Good morning and good evening, everyone. This is Kyung-San Ha from PEMNA Secretariat. Today, I'm going to share the result of new PEMNA survey. This survey is kind of follow-up of the previous survey conducted in May for the Big CoP webinar. And this time we added more questions to cover government performance assessment and future plan and treasury functions. As of yesterday, we have received the answers from 7 countries for Big CoP and TCOP. So it's not complete yet. So what I'm presenting today is just, please keep in mind that it's not the final result yet. In this survey, it has 59 questions for Big CoP and 7 questions for TCOP, covering all the economic and fiscal impact and policy responses and effectiveness and recovery plan for the coming years. This slide shows the confirmed cases of COVID-19 as of last May and as of the several days before. So this graph shows the increase of COVID-19 from the early this year until recent days. At the Big CoP webinar in the last May, we assume that the COVID-19 will be over at some point later this year, but it's still going on. As a result, it reduced the economic growth of all the PEMNA member countries as shown in this picture. And this slide shows that the estimation made last year and the actual GDP growth rate at this point, and it shows that the growth rate is lower than expected last year. And as for the most affected industries, we updated this table with the recent answers from the survey, but it still shows that tourism and transportation and manufacturing are the most affected industries due to COVID-19. It is already covered in the previous presentations, and this table shows the numbers from IMF, and we are going to update these numbers with the answers from the survey later this after this plenary meeting. And this table shows that the revenue is decreasing in most countries, and the expenditure is increasing in most countries as well. As a result, the fiscal balance is getting worse, and the scale of debt is increasing. So the fiscal sustainability is a concern at this time for most countries. We asked about the stimulus packages, and the result indicated that 6 out of 7 respondents is having this stimulus package, but it's just not one-time thing. It's like the number of stimulus packages more than 2. So it's kind of a continuous policy plan for the affected industries and households. This table shows the estimation of ADB for all PEMNA member countries, and the last column shows that the total value of stimulus packages in terms of percent of GDP. At this time, we asked about the perception of the effectiveness of fiscal measures, and we asked about 3 areas: implementation, economic recovery, and supporting vulnerable households and BIS. And the answer shows that the government perceives it somewhat effective. It's like the 3.7 to 4.0. And the implementation is kind of low relative to other areas. As for the monitoring and evaluation framework, 5 out of 7 respondents indicate that they have a monitoring and evaluation framework. And among 5, 3 covers both national and subnational level, and 2 countries cover the national level for monitoring and evaluation. And when we ask about how is this challenging for monitoring and evaluation, the average is kind of a 3.6. It's like somewhat challenging when they monitor and evaluate all these effectiveness of these fiscal measures. The next part is about going forward and the plan for the coming years. We asked about the recovery plan, and 6 out of 7 countries indicated that they have recovery plan for the coming years. It could be short-term or long-term. And the total value is various, and the Philippines shows that 22.5% of GDP will be spent on this recovery plan. And the targets are different country to country, but most of countries answer that health and education and economic boosting will be the main focus of this recovery plan. Actually, we asked 7 questions for Treasury function, and this slide just shows the 1 question. We asked about the challenges for Treasury Department, and the answers are different from country to country, but the main common thing is that the decreasing revenue, but the increasing spending is the most challenges for Treasury function, and they need to finance for all this stimulus package and the recovery plan for coping with this COVID-19. Since we have 59 questions and 7 questions for Treasury, we have a lot more to share with you, but due to the time constraint, I just want to show just part of the survey answers today. And as I mentioned earlier, we have received answers from 7 countries so far. So if you didn't have a chance to participate in this survey, please go to the survey link and complete all these answers. And the result of this survey will be published as PEMNA knowledge product. And we will update all the numbers and answers when you get all the answers from the member countries. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to share any other opinions and any other suggestions for future PEMNA knowledge product. Thank you.
I think, ma'am, you're muted.
Chắc chị Thủy nói lại đi ạ, vì họ vừa không nghe tiếng Anh rồi.
Yes, we can now hear Vietnam. We can now hear Vietnam. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, we have turned on the mic. Okay, so thank you, Madam Help. So next, you see, we have completed all the key items on the agenda for session 2 this morning. You have listened to 2 presentations, one by the World Bank and the other by the Philippines. You have listened to the country updates of Vietnam, Indonesia, and Myanmar. And you have just listened to the Dr. Health from PEMNA Secretariat to talk about the results of the PEMNA COVID-19 survey. So according to the agenda, we still have 10 more minutes for this session. However, as informed by the Secretariat, this session can be prolonged a little bit for 1 hour. So all countries still have opportunity to raise any question or comment to exchange more ideas with the presenters. Up to now, we have just received the question by Mr. Suhas from the IMF for all countries. Mr. Suhas think that for the Philippines, Philippines says that one of the constraints to increase the spending is the legal and regulatory framework. Clearly, in the extent of this pandemic needs some thinking outside the box. What other countries think in terms of such changes that will help reduce the impact of the pandemic? So now what changes, which area need to be considered? So besides that, each country can also share more about the constraints that you may face in relation to dealing with the pandemic. Thank you. So I'd like to give a floor to different member countries to raise any opinion on that.
Well, if
Can
I
I
may, from the
Yes, okay, please. Can you introduce
yes,
yourself as well?
Yes, this is Assistant Secretary Kim Robert De Leon from the Philippine Department of Budget and Management. And just to expound further on the legal implication that was earlier raised by our colleague from the Bureau of Treasury, because we have this provision in our Constitution with regard to the limitation on the enactment of supplemental budget. That is why I also asked earlier on the source of supplemental budget of Korea, because in the Philippines there's this legal provision and regulatory framework that provides that we can only enact supplemental budget out of new revenues or additional taxes that we can impose. But because of the pandemic, of course, it would not be prudent to impose additional taxes. What we have actually employed during the peak of the pandemic is that our Congress has enacted the two what we call the stimulus measures, or what we call the Bayanihan laws. We have two laws that were enacted by Congress authorizing the President and the executive branch to implement fiscal measures in the form of realignments of existing budget so as to finance the more urgent requirements of the pandemic. So this includes reprioritizing, reprogramming some of the budgets that were earlier laid out for 2020. So some infrastructure projects were deferred, meaning the implementation period were divided into 2 years, which were previously programmed for 2021, because we recognize the importance of infrastructure development as it provides several multiplying factors in terms of the economy. So we have not shelved that totally, but have just reprogrammed it to spill over 2021. So that is some of the additional information with regard to the legal and regulatory framework that we currently have in the Philippines. Even if we don't have enough excess revenue to finance a supplemental budget, we have resorted to realignments and, as you have mentioned, thinking out of the box on how we can finance our requirements. Plus the fact, of course, by the support of our international and multilateral partners through loans and grants. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your answer. And next, I would like to invite other participants to share more about the constraints, for example, legal constraints, regulatory constraints from your country. So I'd like to invite the representative of South Korea, please. Can you share your ideas with us? Thank you.
Can I hear the question again?
Okay, so the question is, Philippines says that one of the constraints to increase spending is a legal and regulatory framework. Clearly, the extent of this pandemic needs some thinking outside the box. What are countries thinking in terms of such changes that will help reduce the impact of the pandemic? What changes in which area? Clearly, each country will be different, but there may be many constraints. So can you share these constraints with us? Thank you.
Regarding on increase of the government spending, of course, as I mentioned in the presentation that I did earlier, legally we do not have a rigid constraint on government expenditure, but now since the steep increase of government spending due to COVID-19, our government is now preparing to make a budget balance rule. So we're giving a constraint, a self-constraint upon the fiscal balance ratio and national debt ratio. However, there are kind of a little political controversy that it may restrict us to have to implement active government support to the economy. So I think Korean government is now facing a little bit of dilemma on how to make an adequate constraint in this kind of a situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, representative from South Korea. Any other members, any other participants who want to share any idea?
I just wanted to add one thing. In terms of the issue that we are talking about, thinking outside the box and the constraints that Korea is mentioning and Philippines is mentioning, theoretically, it is a good idea to say limit the number of supplementary budgets, because the idea is that if you haven't done good budgeting, then you're going back again and again to the legislature asking for more money. And it's a clear indicator that the original budgeting was not done properly. But that is in normal times. Times have changed. At this point, we don't know how long this pandemic is going to last. We don't know what the full impact of the pandemic is. We don't know what the costs are. We don't know how the revenue is going to be affected adversely. We really don't know. I mean, we are pretending to know a lot, but we really don't know too much. So when countries are responding, they will have to look at their budget repeatedly during the course of the year. Just doing it once is not good enough anymore, as long as this pandemic lasts. So that is one of the issues that, I mean, this is what I meant, that we have to think out of the box, because theoretically this is good theory, but in practice, in a pandemic, this is no longer good theory. So we have to look at that. Second, I was seeing a very nice question from Fabian about talk on state-owned enterprises. And this is another issue. State-owned enterprises are in many countries, and I'm taking an example from a study we did long back in India on state-owned enterprises and the subsidies the government provides them. And the governments provide state-owned entities overt subsidies and covert subsidies. Overt subsidies are very clear. You see them in the budget, you see money being given. But covert subsidies are very difficult to see because they happen in many ways. The state-owned enterprises pay suboptimal dividends to the government. The state-owned enterprises get loans at substantially reduced costs, interest costs. Sometimes they defer payments. So all these in an economic situation, in a private situation, there would be a penalty to the company for doing things like this. But the state-owned enterprises don't have. So there is a huge amount of money that goes as implied subsidies, covert subsidies to state-owned enterprises. In India, when we did that study in 1993, we found that the hidden subsidies that were going were equal to the entire budget of the Indian Air Force. So that was, in 1993, that was about $2.5 billion, which is a lot more today. It's nearly about $20 billion today. So that is something, again, I mean, nobody expects people to do that analysis during the crisis, but it's a question of recognizing that this is another issue that we need to look at because money does flow out. We may not see it flowing out, but it does flow out. And if it flows out to state-owned enterprises which are working inefficiently, then obviously we are not able to use it for our responses to the pandemic. That's all. They just wanted to add that. Thank you.
If I may, actually related to that SOC, state-owned enterprises, actually, well, funny enough, or at least fortunately enough, in the Philippines, well, of course, we have been able to continue our subsidies to our state-owned enterprises. The most important subsidy is the for our state insurer. I mean, health. The Philippine Health Corporation. So that's of course in times of pandemic, it's really important to make sure they receive the subsidy. Now, one of the ways we have actually addressed the constraint on the Constitution is we have asked our profitable state-owned enterprises to remit dividends, substantial dividends, even advance some of the dividends for to us this year rather than maybe next year. So, and that counts as a revenue. And again, the constitutional requirement was additional revenue. So that's a big part of addressing the constitutional requirement. So, yeah, fiscal risk of the for the SOPs. I think for a lot of countries it's important. At least for the Philippines so far, they have been to put it crudely, we have been raiding their treasury, as it were, to help us fund our pandemic response. But I think it hasn't anyway. Even if we have done that, it has not materially affected their financial health. Now they're still very strong, very healthy. All we've done is made them contribute a little bit more to the efforts to address the pandemic.
I think you're not the only one reading their state-owned enterprises.
Is there any other ideas from any members, any participant anybody who would like to share more regarding this question? Or give any comment to Mr. Fabian's question? Thank you. If nobody wants to share any more idea or no further question, maybe we would like to summarize our session for today. Ladies and gentlemen, within this morning, in the second session, We have listened to experiences and ideas of different countries on how to ensure fiscal sustainability and how to ensure balance in the context in which the revenue is reducing and the spending is increasing. To carry out the programs to control the pandemic. And through the sharing of different countries as well as the sharing from the Q&A session, we can see that the countries may have a very common measures in dealing with the pandemic and ensuring fiscal balance. With the reduction of revenue, we need to find the measures to make up for it, for example, through borrowing and mainly domestic borrowing, and as shared by the World Bank economists. Regarding the support program to deal with the pandemic, we have the channels, for example, increasing their spending to control the pandemic, supporting the affected people by the pandemic. These are the social protection of social support program, and beside countries also pay attention to supporting enterprises, including SOEs and private enterprises, SMEs and micro enterprises. This is an effort to stimulate and recover the economy. Basically, I think we have had very interesting information from different countries. And I think that although we have a fewer questions in this session than before, because maybe we have many questions in the previous session already. And because we have no further questions, I would like I see a question from Heru from Indonesia. Taking a whole public sector and balance sheet approach in monitoring and mitigating fiscal risks, including proactive monitoring of the situation and overt, transparent responses and support. So, the senior economist from the World Bank, Mr. Islamat, can you answer that question?
Hi, I'm happy to take on that question or to talk more generally. So far we were talking about the fiscal risks, and it is not the right policy to tell governments to stop spending or to do fiscal consolidation in the middle of the crisis, but they should think or make plans about how down the road they could put their fiscal houses in order. This is also related to the previous question, not necessarily on the SOEs, but generally speaking about the banking sector or the corporates. Because of everything that has been happening, the regulators in many countries have been advised by the IMF and the World Bank, and they have basically responded accordingly to to practice what we call forbearance. So basically, not to go hard on the banks, not to worry too much about non-performing loans, or not to be too strict on performing loans, but to let some of these things go for now. Now, this was the right approach, we believe, but it's also a little risky because you want to make sure that they are monitoring and that there is transparency, right? So in that sense, all these measures of starting from support to firms to forbearance, basically, letting go of NPLs, etc., or and following up on risks to the SOEs, to the banking sectors, especially, which could be liabilities to the government. They should definitely try to get a better sense, so they have a plan to act when the situation gets better. If they don't monitor and they just go by saying, "Oh, we are not really focusing on saying NPLs right now," and then suddenly a year from now the problem is so big that it will bring them to a new crisis, that is not a good strategy. So for the support to firms, we usually say that that should be time bound, so that there should be like a time when they would say that, hey, we have to stop giving money to firms, otherwise we'll be creating these zombie firms, which will affect the reallocation and the efficient reallocation of resources and will hurt productivity. In addition, it might add to it might compound to the worsening of the balance sheets of these firms, which would add on banks and other lending institutions. The same thing for the central bank lending to the governments. Again, it should be made clear that that there is a limit to that. So usually a time limit is preferable. And for the regulatory forbearance, it should continue, but there should be transparency. The regulator should have the big picture of what is going on. I think, if I missed anything, about the question on the fiscal rules, I know we're out of time. So many governments actually have changed the rules, like the representative from the Philippines discussed, but I think also in Malaysia, if I'm not mistaken, where they had they basically had a law that the budget deficit could not be more than, say, 3%, and they had to temporarily change the rule, and because there was no other way to do it, otherwise, they would have to go to fiscal consolidation, which would have been devastating. And I think that was the right approach. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I propose that because the time is over, if you still want to raise question, can you please send your question to PEMNA Secretariat, and the Secretariat will send the question to the speakers accordingly to get the reply and answer to your questions. So now I would like to give a floor back to the PEMNA Secretariat. So we have already completed session 2 today. I'd like to wish all of you very good health. Thank you very much for participating as speakers and participants in session 2 of this morning. And I'd like to wish all of you good health, and I hope that all of you will be healthy and successful. Thank you. So back to the PEMNA Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thuy. Just a quick announcement before closing. Tomorrow, each CoP will meet separately. and the Secretariat has sent you 2 different connection links for these meetings. One link is for the BCOP sessions and joint COP wrap-up session, and the other link for TCOP sessions. For those who are attending the TCOP sessions, you will need to reconnect using the BCOP meeting link to attend the joint wrap-up session. In case you didn't receive the connection link, please contact the Secretariat. And thank you all. See you tomorrow morning. Bye.